Video, you will see things about the parable of the landowner you've never seen that will bless you greatly. You will also see why many do not move closer to God but are actually moving through life struggling. And I drew out this diagram to help with today's video. So let's get started. The parable is in Matthew chapter 20 verses 1 to 16. Jesus uses this parable to help us know what the kingdom of heaven is like. Keep this in mind as you read through it. Verse 1 describes a landowner going out early in the morning to hire people to work in his vineyard. Gathering grapes to make wine was a big part of Israel's culture, so the people hearing this parable first would relate to this well. This would also make them think of God's song about his vineyard in Isaiah chapter 5 too. If you want me to talk more about that, let me know, but I don't have time to cover that in today's video. So although we don't see vineyards every day, we can understand an employer hiring staff for the day, can't we? It reminds me of my school days. We would get these supply teachers. These were teachers hired for a day, and then we would never see them again. Verse 1 also said the landowner went out hiring early in the morning. This shows us Jesus is looking for people to serve in the kingdom. The landowner goes out himself. More on this later. Jesus doesn't say a time like he does later in the parable, as you'll see. But the Israelite day for most started at sunset, so he likely went out between 5:30 and 6:30 when it was dark. When I woke up this morning, it was still dark, and the trash men were up working while most were still tucked up in bed. Waking up in the dark gives me a better understanding of the passage, but think about it. Jesus went looking first while it was dark. Being ready to serve God at the start of your day is one way to get ahead. This is because most people are still sleeping. But this isn't enough, as you will see as we continue through the parable. But the main point about time in the parable is from the start of the world till the end of the world. Verse 2 says he agreed to pay the laborers a penny a day. One whole penny. But in all seriousness, this was the standard price for a day's work. This was not slave labor or anything like that. As an Israelite, you couldn't agree to a price and then not pay at the end of the day. If you did, you would actually be going against the Old Testament. Now in verse 3, Jesus says he went out again around the third hour. This would be around 9 a.m. Isn't it funny that when most start work for the day, people had already been working for around 3 hours? But notice, God's kingdom is not based on one call. Jesus is calling more than once. This reminds me of how Proverbs speaks of wisdom repeatedly calling out. Wisdom calls in the streets, in the cities, and all over. And this helps us understand the rest of verse 3. Around 9 a.m, Jesus goes out to the marketplace. This was not only for selling things, it was more than that. This is where debates happened. People met up and more. And before we move to verse 4, and I show you one way it can build your faith, there's another thing in verse 3 which is powerful. Jesus says the people hired at 9 a.m. were standing idle. This means they were lazy, not doing anything and acting useless. But this also shows you the kingdom of God is calling people out of a bad situation into the best. In verse 4, those from 9 a.m. also go to work in the vineyard. But Jesus doesn't say they will get a penny. But the workers still went to work based on the promise to receive whatever is right. You don't always know what God will give you, but you place faith in him because he will always do what is right. And like I said earlier, Jesus' call to his kingdom is not a one-off. Verse 5 shows Jesus going out 2 more times. He went out at the 6th hour and 9th hour. So about 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. Jesus went out and hired more people standing lazily in the marketplace. You remember how I said earlier, the Israelite day started for most around 6 a.m, right? Good, because it ended around 6 p.m. This helps us understand verse 6 better. Jesus went out at the 11th hour, so around 5 p.m. now, Jesus goes out again. But this is different. He found more people standing lazily in the marketplace, not working, and asks a question. Why are you standing here the whole day doing nothing? Up until this point, Jesus never did this. When he went out in the dark around 6 a.m. or at 9, 12 or 3, he never asked any questions in the parable. But at the last hour of the day, he asks a question. This shows the expectation for people to get hired. But this also shows the laborers, no one else wanted to hire me. Even until the last hour, Jesus goes out and calls people to come into his kingdom and serve. Before I talk about their reply and share a big revelation this verse gives us, catch this. There is an important lesson here. This is the kind of passage that helps me in areas of life where I've been standing lazily. There were times I'd think I've not done what I know he wants me to do, and it's too late. But this parable shows me if there is still time, I can align those things in my life with his kingdom. A big thing hidden in this verse of the parable is only Jesus can call you into the kingdom. He's the only way in. That's deep, but also shows us the difference between Jesus and the devil in verse 7. The workers around 5 p.m. say to Jesus, "No one hired us." Where Jesus wanted them, the devil is the one who wants us standing idle doing nothing. Jesus welcomes them in and also says he will pay them what's right. Now there's more to come that you've never seen before that will bless you greatly, but before we move to verse 8, I want to show this drawing for a moment. This is the different groups Jesus hired during the day. Those hired early at the top, those hired around 9 a.m. on the left, then those hired at 12 and 3 p.m. in the middle and right, with those hired last around 5 p.m. at the bottom. Those arrows show why many do not move closer to God, but move through life struggling. I want you to think about the arrows as we continue to verse 8, and I'll explain everything for the end. It's evening time now in verse 8. It would be around 6 p.m. The workday is done. There is no more time to hire people, and this relates to the end of the world. The landowner calls his steward and says, "Pay the workers their wages." The landowner didn't send out the steward to hire people, but wants the steward to pay the wages. I thought that was actually interesting, but there's a twist. Pay the wages from those who started working last. So pay those who started at 5 p.m, then 3 p.m, 12 p.m, 9 a.m, and then those working from around 6 a.m. in the dark. Is it only me who assumed the ones who started first would actually get paid first? But remember I said earlier, being ready early isn't enough. I'll tie that up in a minute. But first, verse 9 reveals those who worked 1 hour got a penny. They got a full day's wage. And my first reaction is, what? How are they getting paid the same as those who worked 12 hours? And in other situations, that would be valid, but not to enter the kingdom. But before I show you why many do not move closer to God, but move through life struggling, I need to mention this now and don't want to drag this out. Entering the kingdom is about Jesus' call and faith, not boasting about works you did or how long you worked for. Entering the kingdom is about grace, and grace is a gift. This is why everyone receives a penny. Everyone who responds to the call receives entry into the kingdom. Rewards in the kingdom are different, and if you like, I can touch on rewards in another video. Verse 10 shares the reaction of those who worked from around 6 a.m. in the dark. I'll share something often missed in this verse in a moment, but first, they thought they could get more pay. I've already talked about why they wouldn't receive more, but did you catch why they thought they would get more? Because they saw those who worked about 1 hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, and 9 hours all get paid 1 penny. There's another reason too, which I will discuss in a few verses. But seeing others get paid made them think what they happily agreed to in the morning didn't count anymore. What they were happy with now changed because of what somebody else was getting. But more on this in a moment. Notice those working from 9 a.m, 12 p.m, or 3 p.m. are not mentioned. This shows us in the parable they didn't have a problem with what actually happened, but only those who started first felt they should get more. This leads us nicely into verse 11. When they received the day's wage they agreed to, they now spoke badly about the landowner. In verse 11, they give another reason why they were not happy. I said earlier, they saw everyone else get paid the same and this made them change their expectations. But now in 11, we also see them say, these last set of workers only worked an hour and we worked through the heat. Think about this. They agreed to work for a day's wage. They worked through the heat as they said for a day's wage. And they saw 4 groups of people come during the day to start working. And they kept working for a day's wage. But when they saw others get paid the same, they complained. They focused on works of others and their own works. Also notice they didn't complain about those who started at 3 p.m, 12 p.m, or 9 a.m, only the last set of workers. In verse 13, the landowner says, didn't we agree for a day's wage? The answer is yes. Truth doesn't always feel good, but it always wakes us up. In verse 14, the landowner says, take your wage and go. I'm giving those who started late the same. In verse 15, he continues, Is it not right for me to do as I like with my money? The answer is yes. 4 times in the parable, Jesus said, I will pay what's right. That means in this scenario, paying everyone the same was the right thing to do. And this is how the kingdom is like. But Jesus asks a question which will get us all to think deeply. Is your eye evil because I am good? You see, this shows Jesus' expectation. They could have been happy or they could have been angry. Jesus wanted them to rejoice about everyone getting the same wage. Not to be angry about it, but they were angry and spoke badly about the landowner. Living life focused on what Jesus does for others and not what he's doing for you stops you growing closer to God, and it will keep you struggling. This is why he says in verse 16, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. I don't want to look at others and think, why is God doing this for them and not for me? Because it makes me devalue what God is doing for me and makes Jesus look bad when he is good. In this image, the arrows show why many do not move closer to God, but move through life struggling. It's because Jesus' eyes are on us all. Our eyes should look back on him, but those who started early in the parable were not looking to Jesus. They were looking at other people. So keep your eyes on him, not others, and watch what happens. If you would like me to do another parable, let me know which one, or feel free to ask about something else in the Bible. Talk soon, and God bless.